Next step will be disassembling, cleaning, and getting the motor unit working. Fortunately, the construction of this American Flyer motor is very simple. Aside from the pressed-on wheels, it's all held together with screws and a couple of rivets for the hand reverse unit there. So, it shouldn't be too difficult to work on this one compared to some other motors. First thing will be to remove the brushes. On this motor they're held in by the stiff wire here, and that is simply bent outward and then pulled out from there. And the springs have very high tension on them, so you want to be very careful doing this to make sure nothing flies out and gets lost. Next thing will be to remove the wheels. The wheels are pressed on, and in most cases they'll probably be on there tight enough that you'll need a special wheel puller to get them off. They make standard gauge pullers that look like this one. This is O gauge, so it won't fit. Fortunately, in this case the wheels are kind of loose, so I can just get them off by hand. And after a little twisting and pulling, it came right off for me. The wheel's actually still in real good shape, which means they won't have to be replaced. It just needs a little glue or Loctite to hold it on once the unit's reassembled. And with the first wheel off, the axle can just slide right out of its bearings there. The end is just slightly squared off, probably to hold the wheel in place. So it takes a little bit of twisting and pulling to get it all the way through, but that shouldn't cause any damage to the bearings. Next up, we'll be removing the front plate here so the armature can come out. It's held on by 2 screws, one on each side. Those come out nice and easy. The plate just slips off of there, just like that. Left one brush behind, it wouldn't fall out before. Then the armature just slips on out. And now to get the main reduction idler gear off, the rear bearing plate also has to be removed. And again, it's 2 screws. And there it goes, all nice and greasy. And I'll take the rest of the motor apart. This plate here is held on by these 4 screws here, so all I've got to do is remove them and then that'll come right off, giving me access to the rest of the insides. And there's the 2 halves of the frame disassembled from each other. I've gone ahead and unsoldered that portion there just so they could be completely free from each other. When I put it back together, the wiring's simple. This wire here just goes in the middle along with the headlight wire, and if these wires should need replacing, then this wire here goes to the brush on this side, and this wire here to the brush on this side. The reason the motor doesn't work, I've found, is because one of the windings on there is dead. So I'm going to have to rewind this motor. I used calipers to measure the thickness and found that it's 26 gauge, so I've got some fresh 26 gauge wire that I'll be putting on there. The way this motor is wired, there's one wire coming from each segment of the commutator. That wire wraps around the pole, and then at the end all 3 of the poles are joined together just like this. So when I rewire it, I'll be doing it exactly the same way to make sure it works exactly the same. Alright, I've got all the old windings off of there. I counted each pole just to make sure I was accurate, and it's 71 turns for each of these. So before I start, I'm going to get this all cleaned up with some alcohol. But once I start, the wire will begin around here and then wrap around counterclockwise until I've got 71 turns, and it'll end right here, soldering to the commutator. While I was cleaning it up, I went ahead and put the thing in a motor tool and very carefully polished the steel shaft and the copper commutator with ultrafine grit sandpaper. About 1,000 grit does a pretty nice job and doesn't cause any damage. So now I can get started on the rewinding. This wire I'm using here, I think I said before, it's 26 gauge, and it has a solderable coating, so once I get it on there I don't have to worry about scraping off the finish. I can just solder it directly together, and it makes it a whole lot easier. Alright, and there's the first winding all finished, 71 turns. Started right there at the bottom, just like I showed before. Turned it all around and it ends at the top. It's a good idea to test each winding once you finish to make sure it's working properly, not short it out or anything. And it's best to stay as tight and uniform as possible so that the motor will be balanced. And this is kind of a difficult and tedious process, so if it's not something you're comfortable with, you'll want to have a professional do it. Alright, I've got the armature all rewound and all soldered and ready to go. Giving the motor just a quick reassembly to test it. And there it goes. Works perfect. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is clean up all the major steel parts. I'm going to start by using a big steel wire wheel to take off most of the rust on there. And then I'll just clean up the rest with alcohol, and that should be enough. I went ahead and removed the roller plate from there to make it easier to handle. And right up here is the wire wheel and the drill press. They'll be spinning at high speed, so it'll take off all the rust and everything else pretty quickly. Alright, I've got these parts cleaned up at least well enough. Some of that rust was a bit heavier than I expected, so I had to use a heavier duty wire wheel to get it all off of there. Then next up is cleaning the wheels here. This one here I just finished, and they're all in pretty good shape, so it's not too hard to get them all looking pretty good. And to clean the wheels, I'm just using the wire wheel again. There's only a tiny bit of light rust on the steel part there, and that comes off pretty easy, and then just a bit of dirt and oxidation around the rest of it. Some paint is chipping there, so I'll likely repaint these wheels later. But getting them cleaned up is at least pretty easy. And next up is the idler gear. It's made out of steel, and it's still got all the old grease on there, which is all dried up and caked on pretty well. So I'll be using the wire wheel again to clean it up. Okay, the wire wheel cleaned that up real good, and for anything that was left over on there, a little 90% alcohol on a paper towel took that off nice and quick. I also gave the roller plate here a quick cleaning. As you can see, the fiber plate isn't exactly in the best of condition. It's warped with age and soaking up oils and humidity. The rollers are still in really good shape, so as long as they touch the track fine, it should still be okay to use this. Got everything cleaned up pretty nicely now, so I can get started on reassembly. And I'll be using a heavier grease for all the bearings just to make sure it lasts a long time and holds up real well to heavy use. And there it is, all nice and reassembled. So now it's time to give it a little track test and make sure it's working the way it's supposed to. Alright, I've got the thing set up on a nice little circle of fresh standard gauge track here. Got a Lionel RW transformer, 110 watts, plenty to drive the thing. Let's see how it runs. Took off smooth and strong, just the way it's supposed to. And little manual reverse switch there. And it runs just as well in reverse. And that's it for restoring the motor. Next thing we'll get on to is repainting the body and polishing up the details.